This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. We are joined this week by Shawn Powers for the first time as a co-host, and we'll be talking with Devon Loffreto of KidOYO about what he's doing with open source, among other things, to completely change the way education is done. That's coming up next. FLOSS Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Stay in control when it comes to your company's access points and authentication. LastPass makes security simple for your remote workforce. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 588, recorded Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. KidOYO. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so your ISP can't see the sites you visit. For 3 extra months free with a 1-year package, go to expressvpn.com/floss. And by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including OEMs like Dell EMC, and it's virtual, so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly. And we are joined this week by a new co-host. We pulled off the Linux Journal bench, which is Shawn Powers. And so, Shawn, there he is, with a good camera, and with Mr. Rogers sticking out of the corner of his hairline there. So where are you? We always need to check in and see where people are in the physical world.
If you're familiar with people from Michigan, this is the map of Michigan, and I live at the pinky finger here, right at the tip of the pinky finger in Petoskey.
In Petoskey, which is, as I recall, it's not far from the Avenue of Trees or the Tunnel of Trees,
That's true. Harbor Springs is just down the road. Yeah.
I was there last summer. Fantastic. I went up the dunes.
Didn't call me, but okay.
Which is south. I know I didn't. I forgot. I was traveling with my sister, and we were just doing stuff. But anyway, and so our topic this week is open source and education, and our guest is Devon Loffreto, who is one of my heroes. We've talked a lot about SSI, self-sovereign identity, on the show so far several times, and he coined that term. And we may talk about that too. But first, before we get to the show itself, I have to help pay for this thing. So I'm going to do that with our first ad, and that is for ExpressVPN. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by ExpressVPN. I don't know how many times you've tried to search online, trying to find something, wondering what others know about you. Well, your ISP knows. And if you don't take measures to prevent that, that's going to continue. And you might think, why don't I just use incognito mode? Well, let me tell you something. Incognito mode does not hide your activity. It doesn't matter what mode you use or how many times you clear your browsing history. Your internet service provider can still see every single website you ever visit. That's why when I'm home, I never go online without using the ExpressVPN. And it doesn't matter, by the way, what make or what company you get it from, whether it's Verizon or Comcast or any other local ISP. No matter what they promise, they can still not only watch you, but they can legally sell your information to ad companies. So what ExpressVPN does is reroutes your internet connections through their secure servers so they can't see you. And it keeps all your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data and routes. And they do that using the most powerful encryption available. Most of the time, I don't even realize I have the VPN on because I'm busy being elsewhere. And in fact, often I want to go to a specific place. I want to be in Germany. I want to be in the UK and see what life is like online there. And I can do that with ExpressVPN. It runs seamlessly in the background, and it's terribly easy to use. All you have to do is tap one button, and you're protected. And it's available on all your devices, phones, computers, even your smart TV. So there's no excuse for you to not be using it. So protect your online activity today with the VPN rated #1 by CNET and Wired. Visit my exclusive link, expressvpn.com/floss, and you can get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/floss. expressvpn.com/floss, FLOSS, to learn more. Okay, let the show begin. Our guest today is Devon Loffreto of KidOYO, and I was asked several times, do you ever say KidOYO? I don't think you do. Do you? I think it's too important. You do. Oh, you could do it both ways?
Yeah, I pronounce it KidOYO.
Oh, you
OYO
do?
stands for own your own, so it's kind of built into the name.
So unpack on your own for us. This is one of these topics where I'm terribly familiar with it and nobody else is. So give it to us straight.
Yeah. So many years ago, going back into the 1900s, as my son likes to say, I started volunteering in the schools, introducing kids how to program, and along the way, just kind of naturally flowed into this idea that we wanted kids to own their own literacy and all the artifacts that go along with it. And so the process and the methods and the data and the projects that they're building, giving them methods that would allow them to retain local root control over all of that while still having the convenience of accessing cloud services and talking to distributed mentors and having all of the security that went along with it. OYO was built right into the idea that, we spent a lot of time just kind of working on our data structure and getting that right, but letting the kids understand the importance of that type of root control. So we put it right in the brand, and the kids get it immediately.
So, and so how long have you been doing this? And go ahead, answer that question. I have another one quickly after that.
KidOYO, well, so I wrote a book about this back in like 2005 timeframe. 2010 was really kind of our official launch timeframe, coincided with my own son being in kindergarten. And so we've been running robust programs since then.
And you work both independently and with schools. So
that's right.
So yeah. So tell us a little bit more. Yeah.
We have always run programs on university campuses, and we started in Central Virginia. So we were working with University of Mary Washington, primarily down there. And then we kind of took our own family's independent learning activities to Long Island, where resources were a little bit more plentiful for us to be able to access. And so we partnered with Stony Brook University and their Department of Computer Science and College of Engineering and Applied Sciences, as well as really every university on the island, and started running programs there where we would bring mentors in, get them trained up on how to work with young kids, and run programs that were initially open to the entire family. So we would get 150, 200 people showing up. Kids and the parents would fight for keyboard control, and we teach them Python. Or, if I was running a program, we have Brookhaven National Lab out here. They were looking for Python developers that could give visualization to a lot of the data they held. So we would run these programs and kind of introduce kids to how this would work, and we ended up introducing entire families. And along the way, superintendents were in the room with their kids. We got invited into the schools, and it's kind of turned into this dual scenario where our mentors are now working directly with the students and virtually every day throughout the entire year, even before everybody went virtually. And so now we're kind of status quo, just continuing on helping the schools approach virtual learning in a functional way.
Okay, that really brings the question that I was going to ask there. How has this insanity that we're in with hybrid learning and virtual learning and half online, half in the classroom, how has that changed? Have you found that to be pretty easy to adapt to? And what does that look like differently from what it looked like before, if at all?
That's a great question. I think that it caught a lot of schools off guard in the sense that you've got a lot of apps being pulled into a classroom, and it's still under the control of the teacher, who can set pace and really kind of contain what's happening in any class period. And now the ability to easily bring your teaching pedagogy into a virtual space and have it be a seamless experience where everyone feels comfortable with the tools they're accessing. It just happened that I think having a foundation in computer science and coding and engineering meant that our platform was very succinct and efficient in the movements that it produced. So now when the teachers are starting to bring in content that goes beyond coding and computer science and engineering, we're really treating it as a computational literacy layer on top of English or even gym class. One of the most interesting pieces here has been we've got gym teachers who have been challenging their students to be active and using videos as challenges in our platform. And so you've got kids that are responding inside of a platform designed for coding and computer science, but now we're doing physical exercise and trying to get them to see beyond the initial definitions and letting the teachers define curriculum that still taps into all of those capabilities.
That's cool. So my wife is a teacher, actually. And so one of the struggles that she's had is to keep all of the students engaged in whatever, she teaches multiple subjects, but keeping them engaged. I suspect something like this would make it possible to keep more kids engaged rather than, everybody just sitting at a Zoom and looking at my beautiful wife, gorgeous that she is. You can only keep people engaged for so long. So I could see this really aiding in whatever this next school year looks like for whatever school. So it's kind of exciting to see where it could benefit more than even what you've been doing. I mean, it could really expand on your goals and possibly help teachers out in a way that they don't even realize they might need help.
That's true. We just finished our first teacher camp of the summer, and I think some of the feedback that's been coming at us, we believe we have something that's strong and that is good for people to use. But when it comes back from students and teachers, it means something much more substantial. I think that given this community, programming and learning to code for the longest time has always been a self-led endeavor. Right? You show up at the university and you get homework that first day, and they're going to assume for a long time that you were going to teach yourself the Java required to give back the homework you needed. And so this idea of being a self-led learner is something that's innate in programming, but obviously not innate in the rest of how traditional schooling works. And so when kids come into our platform and they're introduced to a method of following learning pathways or open-ended courses and challenges that are aligned to a specific credentialed outcome that we can verify computationally that they understood a skill by giving us a demonstration of it, it changes, I think, the comfortability that teachers have in assessing a self-led learning process and what kind of expectations can you build? How can these kids engage in advanced materials when they're on their own so much in a virtual environment? And we're getting some great responses. I've got kids who have passed the APCS-A test as early as 6th grade and who have finished the entire K-12 computer science curriculum in 7th, 8th, 9th grade. They're done. So now we're starting to talk to universities about how do we make the university credit something that's accessible at these earlier ages in a easy to engage method.
How do you handle at-risk kids? I mean, the ability to own your own and do your own is great, but there are some at-risk kids that, one, may not have the equipment to get that jump start at home versus also possibly needing some more help from the teacher. I assume if if they're working on their own largely, it frees up teachers and whoever is there to help individuals who need that help. But have there been struggles with at-risk children who are having a difficult time accessing either the hardware or whatever they would need to do that? Or is that something individual schools or groups have to address?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I mean, you definitely have a teacher as a wife, and that's a sensitive zone that I think is often overlooked. And in our live programs, we would always, if I look back statistically, I bet you 50% of the room was in some way on the spectrum. And obviously we've had people who show up with aides who have never learned independently in their entire duration of schooling, who they almost take as ducks to water in this type of learning. And it's really opened up people's perceptions of what was possible. So many of our tools have been built with that framing in mind, that we're getting classrooms that are at-risk students in one way all coming into the platform. And then there's the other side, which is having access to broadband, having access to computers, right? So many people invest in phones, but they don't make the investment in a desktop or a laptop, or they make an investment in an iPad where you have a consumer device coming at you. But now when you want to be a producer of learning, you lack that keyboard and mouse that's so critical to the process. So, as an independent entity, we were never funded by anybody. We self-funded this entire thing by delivering services. And so we do the best we can. I've given out a lot of Linux machines over the years and tried to induce people kind of engaging that learning process. But we're still not getting the support from the big corporate players who have pledged billions in support of CS for all. But when it comes right down to it, it's more of a marketing campaign for their own endeavors.
So I have a question about how kids learn from each other, because I saw that when I visited you guys working with Mineola Public Schools. And really, I was impressed at how the kids weren't competing, but basically working together, regardless of how advanced some kids were over others. And I'm wondering how that's working now, or if you could explain a little bit more about how that works. I'm especially interested, especially as you have these kids in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade who are already checked out at the college level, how they can help, maybe even help the teachers.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite parts of this. When our initial batch took the AP CSA test as 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they did it as a test of their own volition to see how much computer science am I learning while I'm really focused on coding. Right, I want to build these functional outcomes, and CS is an afterthought. If I lead with CS, I got 2 minutes, and then they're gone. They've lost attention. So what happened was that in the peer learning, the goals that these initial group of kids had set for themselves started to influence the next group, and the next group came on with the same thing. I'm gonna do this, not because anyone said that I should, but because I heard someone say that there's no limitation. There's no age grading limitation. Ironically, the year after our 6th grader took the test and got university credit, there was an age limitation because he couldn't log into the website to get his score, since they had an age grade of 13 on Access. But that has really scaled into something impressive. This summer at KidOYO, if you check out our website, you'll see in our events listings, many of these are led by some of these students. So I've had a student this morning teaching Swift. We'll be teaching Xcode at the end of the week. We've got another student teaching Python, doing raycasting for a game that they've led. Yesterday, I had a kid who was in the 10th grade and was teaching Python and math as a summer program that was just his interest. And, it took some time to talk about the history of terminology in math and how certain concepts are presented in school versus how you really need to understand it when you're running a program that is going to use math to create the procedures. And it was fascinating. These kids are starting to be the best teachers of each other, and they immediately get the attention of their peers.
I'm wondering so have you been at it long enough now so you're seeing how the kids are doing when they get out of high school or when they move from the lower grades to a different high school? Are you conducting a longitudinal study on how this goes over a long term?
We're just starting to. This is the first year that our community is starting to graduate out of high school and go into college. We had one student last year decide to leave school early and pursue his dream school, which was Stony Brook University, and was disappointed. He had a 1500 on the SAT, had everything lined up, but missed a specific test requirement, or I guess it was a course requirement on the math track that he missed, and so was forced to go to a community college. Got despondent, decided that he would try to get an internship, got hired as a software development intern, and has been working there for the better part of this year, and is now going to pursue a game development degree down in Florida. So we're starting to see these kids start to pursue what they're going to do at the next level. And of course, right as that happens, we've got this disruption of who's going to campus and who's not, and what does that mean for how your studies are going to progress. So we're going to start to see how this plays out in the next couple of years.
So you focus on languages, which is awesome. One of the things that I'm passionate about open source because it kind of takes the branding or the specific tool out of the equation, right? It's so many things are compatible. Have you found that focusing on development and programming in a language makes the students more flexible or more able to adapt to whatever environment they find themselves? For a long time I worked at a school district that was 100% Macintosh, and then I worked at a school that was Windows, and then I introduced Linux terminal server. But anyway, some of the kids really struggled when they were on specific tools as opposed to a language that will work everywhere. So, I mean, first of all, thank you for not being tool specific, but how does that help students as they move forward? Have you noticed anything that they're better problem solvers, et cetera?
Yeah, that is a big deal, and it's still an issue. And so I think the first thing that happens is the kids become innately familiar with the underlying lack of constraints when they approach this type of learning with language-centric methods, and they become advocates inside their own school for why are we dependent on a Mac lab, or why are we dependent on an iPad one-to-one initiative? And so for the administrative leaders that are really listening to the student voice and taking that into account, our first partner, who was just named National New York State Superintendent of the Year, Dr. Mike Nagler, he took it on himself to, just from an administrative courage standpoint, they were a one-to-one iPad district. We showed up in their third and fourth grade, and the kids they couldn't really code on an iPad. So we were building specific tools to allow them to bypass that constraint, which is really just a keyboard constraint. And along the way, he decided, all right, well, we're going to get some Chromebooks in here because everything that we make accessible is right there in the browser. And at least we'll have something that they put it on wheels and send it from classroom to classroom. But he wasn't afraid to solve the problem, I guess is what it comes right down to. The kids are starting to isolate what some of these problems look like for themselves. And inside of our program, we actually present open source, closed source as an option in every single file that the kids create. And, I teach them about open source from the positive vantage point of why you might want to be a contributor. And, then we let them provoke. What does that mean for you? And one of the interesting things that comes back at us most frequently is the loss of authenticity. They want to see authentic skills. They want to see authentic leadership. And sometimes with open source, that's a missing ingredient because now we've given away so much that the leaders aren't necessarily seen, and it's a downstream result that we're looking at.
Well, that's fascinating. And a take that I've actually hadn't heard before. So, I mean, I've heard of leadership issues with individual projects, but in general, that is fascinating. It would take a kid to notice something like that. So that's cool. I just got to say the one-to-one iPad drove me nuts as a school administrator for that exact reason. They're great products for consuming, but trying to create, boy, that's rough. Chromebooks, this is a weird thing to hope, but I'm hoping maybe something good that comes out of this pandemic is the need for kids to be able to function from home with something like a Chromebook. I know so many schools are sending Chromebooks home because they're affordable and they work and et cetera. I'm hoping that means that Chromebooks will be accessible, whether or not it's home or at the school, because it's a great device to create, not just to consume. So I can tell that that's something that you've struggled with. And keyboards with an iPad, I mean, it's a kludge, but hey, whatever it takes to produce something instead of just consume it.
Absolutely. I share your perspective on that. Absolutely. And we are seeing the leaders stepping up and trying to make this accessible. I know that they're lobbying right now to try to get the broadband issue solved. You have so many kids in the at-risk. Going back to that question, just that they're not on equal footing. They can't have access here, and I've reached out with communities and access leaders, and we try to get messaging out there. But there's just so many constraints you have to address to even get us to an equal ground to learn in similar ways. So there's no magic bullet in that regard, or it just needs more.
All right, so I have a question. So you've had students go through for several years. Have you found any students really interested in contributing to projects? Like, I mean, do you have students that are contributors to GitHub, have their own projects? Have you created little nerdlings?
Absolutely. And, it's funny. Some of our best programmers have always been Linux programmers. And one of the things that comes about is they just have innate skills and they follow the breadcrumbs with ruthless attention to what they're trying to accomplish with their machines. And then we walk into, we defined ourselves for a long time as a creative computing endeavor because we're trying not to be kind of the old school CS method that runs into a lot of just issues in terms of who had access and who was walking into that type of learning. Whereas on the creative computing side, if we bring a little bit different focus to bear, then we found a different type of audience was coming into the programs. But ironically, as soon as we run a hackathon focused on creative computing outcomes, those Linux kids sometimes suffer. They didn't necessarily have the ability to conceptualize a creative solution in the same way. They're kind of almost like your back-end administrator skills, right? So now they're starting to learn from each other, and they're pushing on their own lessons. I've got one student this summer who's going to be introducing kids to Linux, and he's all about Linux all the time. And so it's, I think another one's going to be teaching Bash. And, there'll be an introductory kind of phase for kids that really know nothing about this stuff. And we might be learning with Raspberry Pis at the onset, but ultimately just at least exposing them to the different pathways that they can traverse.
That's awesome. I hear Linux users are also the best looking. So
absolutely.
So I'm wondering if kids are taking this home, doing home you mentioned Raspberry Pi, right? So our guest last week was somebody who is running an entire radio station out of his house. All of his software is on one Raspberry Pi. And I'm wondering, I mean, of course he's an older guy, but are kids like doing projects on their own at home and then bringing them in and then sharing them and learning off of that?
They are. Yeah. In fact, both Raspberry Pi and Arduino have been really big for us. Obviously, not only because the cost makes failure accessible, right? We teach fail forward as a methodology and just try to introduce failure to schooling in a productive vernacular or just method, right? When you're programming, you're constantly failing. And so we have to have this kind of resilient attitude when we enter into the process. But when it gets into you're doing this with hardware, the cost of failure is sometimes overwhelming to the process. And so Raspberry Pi and Arduino has been fantastic from that standpoint. And we actually have our own hardware prototyping kit that we use the Arduino open source hardware and kind of customized our learning process to the components in the kit. And so all summer kids are using that. And we have a kid right now who's documenting a greenhouse that he built at home with his family to manage humidity and sunlight levels and automate the process of changing all that. He's going to present it to the community as a learning process that the kids can start to see how did I use my KidOYO hardware prototyping kit, and then around it put some of these other components, and here's my coding scripts, and here's how I started to engage this to make it a real project.
We have some more questions that follow, but I would need to go to the second ad. So this episode of Floss Weekly is also brought to you by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology began building their Advanced Technology Center, or ATC, 10 years ago, and it has grown exponentially. It's like no other testing and research lab. It contains more than $500 million in equipment from hundreds of OEMs and key partners ranging from heavyweights like Dell EMC, VMware, and Intel to emerging disruptors like Equinix. WWT is a trusted partner who stays with you over the years. Many of their customers have been with them for over a decade because they know WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure their business runs right. Their ATC is an incubator for IT innovation and offers on-demand and schedule-able labs like Dell EMC, VxRail, Data Protection Central, and IDPA. These labs represent the newest advances in primary storage. There are hundreds of labs to explore, including multi-cloud, hyper-converged infrastructure, networking, secondary storage, data analytics, AI, and more. You can learn about products before you launch. WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concept and pilots using the ATC lab environment so customers can confidently select the best solutions. In many cases, this reduces concept time from months to weeks, which increases speed to market. They also offer lab as a service, a dedicated lab space within the ATC. Here, customers can perform programmatic testing using the vast technology ecosystem that WWT has already built. It's virtual, so you can take advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world 24/7. WWT engineers work in these labs every day, beta testing new equipment, building reference architectures and custom integrations to help their customers make decisions and see results faster with much less investment. WWT has launched a digital platform encompassing the ATC ecosystem. This ever-evolving platform creates a multiplier effect of knowledge, speed, agility, anytime, anywhere around the world for their customers and partners. Get full access to articles, case studies, hands-on labs, and other tools that make the difference in today's fast-paced world. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and become a member of their growing community, go to wwt.com/twit to create an account and gain access to their on-demand labs today. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. Okay, so I have a question about your larger ambitions. So I mean, I've seen your system at work, and I've seen your kids doing amazing stuff firsthand, and it strikes me as that it's very transformative. I mean, I saw what you were doing in the Mineola school system, and with Dr. Nagler, who just won this award. I'm glad to hear that because he's fantastic. Also, the story of how you met him is also interesting because it wasn't part of a marketing campaign; it just happened. And I'm wondering how this spreads. I mean, because what you're doing is not part of the standard pedagogy, but we're also at a moment in time right now when lots of standard everything are being thrown out the windows. I mean, I find that I can talk to lots of people now about subjects that they never would have called me on before. I mean, I actually had a conversation with the CEO of Zoom a few weeks ago because he liked something I wrote. You know, I never would have had that before because everybody's doing broken field running now. But you get up against massive institutional flywheels. And so I'm wondering, what's the mix of ambition and where this goes?
Yeah, we're not totally sure. I mean, what we have right now is we're about to release something brand new that, on the one hand, is trying to bring this, what I call functional literacy, down to the earliest age possible. So we're going to be introducing this to pre-K and really from 3 up, getting kids understanding some of the concepts that they're going to engage in programming and how that'll affect the process of engaging things like math and some of the ELA subjects and science. It changes some of the order of operations. You know, we teach these kids at a very young age to move on an XY grid, and that's not something they see till 5th grade, but we're teaching it now to pre-K. So it changes that order. As we go through the process and we now look at, all right, well, what is the university experience? It's been obvious for a long time for some people that needed to change, and the value to cost ratio needed to also change. And so we've been influencing that from within for a little while, but you get into this situation where the bureaucracy is so strong and there's so many competing ideologies that sometimes you can get thrown just because you're trying to do something that is direct to the learner. And in some ways, it can look scary to the people who are trying to maintain their labor value in that. I think from our standpoint, we'd like to help everyone understand that there's a place for them and that, things like AI are not going to be destroying everybody's ability to work anytime soon. and nor that it may never be that case. But at the same time, what we really need is problem solvers, and that comes in many different forms. So whether it's about empowering the ability for computer science to be accessible within every domain of study, and that it become the empowering science that it is, and not just a carve out where you have too many kids who want to take classes in a university that can't serve that demand. We have solutions to make this something that's accessible for everybody. Or if it's just bringing it down earlier and earlier and changing the way in which we are starting to interrogate some of these subjects at earlier ages and giving kids a sense of ownership over their own pacing. One of the most damaging things I've seen in learning is the need for an educator to control the pace of a learner. And so that's one of the first places where we try to make an impact, is just to showcase that, yeah, you're going to have some fourth graders that are learning at the level of a 10th grader, and they're going to put on a show for you. And don't try to stay ahead of them and be the commander of the learning process. You got to learn how to kind of lead in a different way, because these kids are going to pass you in 2 weeks. You have no chance of staying ahead of them.
All right, so that leads exactly into what I was going to ask, and the flashing light behind me is a perfect explanation to what I'm going to ask here. So this light is programmable on the web, and people who watch my live streams like to make it flash and do all sorts of things like that. My question is, you mentioned getting kindergarten kids interested in programming, or at least programmatic thoughts. I assume like Scratch and stuff. What do you actually do? I mean, so feet on the ground running, what is it that you do for younger kids to get them engaged and to get them to actually want to use programmatic problem-solving solutions to everyday issues? Like you mentioned, integrating into other things, even into gym class. What does that actually look like?
Yeah. It's about giving them control over the feedback loop. How many things in their world can they change just by directly interacting with it? And so sometimes some of the easy ones that have always been fun for these young kids is just getting them. There's an old program where we try to get them to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, where the teacher's the program up at the front of the room, and they have to give commands to make that sandwich. And based on the way they do it, the teacher tries to perform the action the way they described it. And so you might have peanut butter on the chalkboard, or it might end up somewhere that it wasn't intended because the instruction wasn't direct. But now what we're doing is we're giving them this experience of a direct feedback loop that they're in control of, and starting to introduce the idea of time. One of the things for this generation is this instantaneous feedback that's coming. So always in our program, they're getting responses from real mentors. We don't use auto graders because it constricts how they're able to devise their solutions. You have to fit that solution within the expectations of the auto grader. Instead, we have real people who are evaluating submissions, and they may see things they'd never considered as a possibility, but it works. And so how do you give a response back to a young learner who's done something, provoked a feedback loop that seems to work, and it might be the strangest code you've ever seen written, but it worked. And so we have this new app that my wife actually is responsible for, called Color by Code. And on it, it has this natural process of time passing. There's an earth that kind of spins, and artifacts are loaded to the planet as they earn them. And the kids are going through exercises that are really simple. We're introducing them to concepts like if-then conditions and loops, but we're putting it into a language of pictures and diagrams that they're already familiar with. It's almost coming right out of a coloring book. And now they're able to start to interact with these concepts before ever actually walking into a fully computational editor, right? But it's starting to happen where now we have kindergartners who are understanding XY concepts and advanced mathematical ideas in logic, and they're giving it back to the teachers. And it just took one teacher saying, "I'll try that," to put it out there, and let's test it with the kids and see what happens.
It's like wax on and wax off, right? But we're teaching them programming instead of karate. That's that's awesome. That's really great.
Exactly, and so many things that are truly innovative start off as toys. Well, when you go down into that kindergarten classroom, we are playing to learn. And so trying to find the language of the kid and bring the learning to them in that language, as opposed to pull them into our language. I think that's where we spend a lot of our time, is just to try to cross that bridge.
So is Python, we've said Python a couple times. Is it specific to Python? I mean, is that the ultimate goal for you? I mean, obviously using tools that aren't even language specific, but do you have, I mean, is this a thought process from beginning to end? Like we start with concepts and we narrow down, we use like Scratch or something to give them actual computer logic and hone into Python? We mentioned Bash earlier. I guess what is the end more specific, or is it just to think programmatically and to be able to use whatever language that they might need to use for any particular problem?
Yeah, it's more we want them to be able to use the right language to solve the problem. So, oftentimes the teachers will try to approach this and say, well, first I'm going to introduce kids to Scratch, and then we're going to progress to HTML, and then we're going to go to Python, and thinking that you can stack one language on top of the other as a progression model, when in reality, every language exists to do something specific. So what we're trying to introduce them to, I'm issuing domain names, hosting accounts, and kids have their own text editors for their own website. So we teach them HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on their own domains. And every night we package up their domain as something they can download and take to another host with them. And in that vein, they are starting to display Python projects or Java projects or some art projects that they might building their own sprites. And so we'll start in a simplified way before they have typing skills, and start using Blockly and JavaScript to kind of build some block-based programming experiences. And then we'll help build bridges out of that into the more semantically challenging languages and start to understand that if you want to learn Java, and you're a kid, the reason you might want to learn Java is because your robotics team is going to be using Java, or the AP test is going to use Java, or Minecraft modding is going to use Java, right? And so we'll start to introduce these languages in different project-based outcomes. And it doesn't matter to me if, our platform is a lot of Python, a lot of JavaScript, a lot of databasing, right? So we have a strength in that regard, but, we are teaching them as many languages as we can find practical ways to display a project-based outcome to them. I'll just say, awesome. We just talked to Apple the other day because one of the challenges we were having was that in schools, the kids can't really publish anything to the App Store, right? You have to have a professional developer account. And so the schools have been using kind of a kibbutz model where the school gets all the IP of the student work. And so we approached Apple and said, hey, is there any chance that we could kind of move beyond that and have more of this OYO model where kids have access to their own development accounts and could perhaps publish to some type of an EDU app store? And that's now progressing up the value chain just as an idea. Who knows if it'll ever come to anything, but just the fact that they have ears for it and that the kids are asking us to advocate for it, I think is a meaningful pointer of what they're looking to do.
I'd like to jump onto the topic of self-sovereignty, and especially as these kids are learning what that means, even if they're not using that word. There's been institutional pushback against using the term self-sovereign or even sovereign at all. It's loaded in a number of different ways, but there's a specific meaning of it that I'm very in favor of. The first time I heard it, I said, yes, that's it. And on a list that we're both on that I run, we've had a little bit of an argument about that in which you and I had each other's backs. So I'm wondering if you could unpack that a little bit and put it, like why you came up with that in the first place. Because you made this wonderful distinction back in 2012, maybe earlier, between administrative identity, which is what we call our ID. Somebody gives you your driver's license. That's not your identity. There's something that is you that's not that is your self-sovereign identity. And so I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit to us about where you were coming from with that, because that's one of your fingerprints on the world right now. It's taking off as a concept, and I think that's good.
Well, I appreciate that, and you've certainly had a big part to play in that. And I would say that, first statement that needs to be said is I'm a big believer in civil society. I'm definitely not a supporter of anarchy. and not trying to produce methods that would take us down that direction. I'm also somebody who believes that we've fallen into the trap of passive citizenship rather than understanding what our role is in America specifically to be the purveyors of what it is that we experience. And so when I look at this from the standpoint of our structure of participation and how we inaugurate a new life into our system, whenever I see a provisioning process where citizenship is the result of having provisioned rights, I think we're backwards. That's not how this country is supposed to work. And I know that everywhere that I go, there's no one who's just kind of opening the door and say, "Hey, Devon, can you possibly give more charity?" It's usually me having to bust down doors and say, "I have something to offer, and I'm not really in need of permission. I'm going to offer it and let people engage with me." So from a self-sovereign standpoint, I was listening to my son yesterday in a debate with his friends where they were talking about intellectual property. And so often in these young groups, communism is something that gets discussed a lot in our meme generation here, in which I turn on them and say, "All right, don't be a meme. Memes are cool, but being a meme is not so cool." But he used the term, he said, it's like intellectual identity. The reason we have to respect intellectual property is because otherwise, how are we going to have respect for our intellectual identity? And I had never heard that put that way. And to hear it come out of a now 15-year-old who has heard me his whole life talking about this in one form or another, he understands at this point that he is the source of the things that he advocates for, and that the rights in this country are not something that's going to be provisioned to him fully formed. He actually has to represent them directly to make them real. And so that's kind of the basis of self-sovereign identity, that in this country, an identity shouldn't be something you get from a database. It shouldn't be something that someone is provisioning to you. You have an identity before you ever come of age as a functioning participant, as a citizen, right? It's yours. You're the source of it. And even if we take that out and put it in a family context, the family is the protectorate and the source of your own sovereign authority to act with rights. And so the structure of our digital artifacts, or the structure of our identity artifacts in the world today, is seemingly backwards. And it's just the order of operations doesn't compute. You can't make a math formula compute if you do it backwards. And here we are. We're looking at an identity system that in so many regards has put the cart ahead of the horse. Yeah,
I want to plug Clea Young, who was on here a couple days ago, or a couple shows ago, has a book coming out. And I've read a draft of it, and it visits self-sovereign identity, which nothing about identity did in the past, and that's one reason why it's starting to take off. But the key part of that, and the thing that appeals to me so much, is that there's part of it that is the "I am the captain of my soul" aspect, which is only I can be me. But a big part of it is that in the giant freight forwarding system that is credentials, we should be in the position to decide where this goes and what it's for and how it all works. And I'd like your emphasis on civil society, because I'd kind of like to bring that back to the educational framework, because I think we're really doing the whole thing over again. I mean, a lot of the conversation I've been in the last 2 days has been around how a lot of colleges are burning down. They're going to burn down. The college I went to has almost no endowment. Another one, Bard, has almost no endowment. It's a major college, but if they have no income in the next 2 years because they're busy scaling back everything they do with their cost structure not changing a whole lot, sports not happening, and all the income from that not happening, I think we've really, for better and worse, but hopefully for better, we're hitting a reset button. I mean, we would never have had, I looked at a giant spreadsheet yesterday of 500 colleges, and like a quarter of them are estimated by academics to go out of business. That, on the one hand, that's awful. On the other hand, I look at what you're doing and I see it feeding kids into where that was and seeing something else happening to it. So I'm wondering if you've thought about that much as you're looking toward how this all plays out?
Yeah, I think about it all the time, Doc. And I always try to figure out how to play a productive role. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings giving demos of our system and had some high-level people at really top-level universities say, you are going to kill the university. And the only thing I can say is that's not my intent. I'm trying to bring a method that is accessible to anyone to use. But I do recognize that there's a conflict here. You know, oftentimes in our educational community around where we're part, there's a big push for diversity and inclusivity and to make this system perform on a more equal basis. But we're using credentials of exclusion. And so those people that are allowed to participate in the conversation with credibility have earned that right to be in that conversation by holding a degree that is not accessible except at great cost and by choice to really acquiesce to the design of the system, right? We know that when I go to school, those first 2 years, I'm going to be repeating high school. Right, I'm learning the same things over and over again. It's not until I get to 300 level classes, and really not until I get to a master's level, that I'm going to start being able to demonstrate learning in the way that we're now doing it in a K-12 space. So I don't know how you survive building a credentialing model where it's not something that people, through their own just ambition to be part of this, kind of taking something from the open source community, right? Where we want to make opportunity accessible to all. We want to try to create an inclusive design. And yet there's a lot of obstacles that we have to get through to even approach the front door. So I think that that's a big part of this, is thinking through how are these credentials working. When I have my degree certificate hanging on the wall and I can't really understand what it says about me other than maybe I have some discipline, right? But now I have these micro credentials that have computational artifacts inside of it, and they can stand up a skill that anyone can evaluate and see what it does. What does that mean for the structure of the credentials that are coming out of these universities, and how the workforce is depending upon the meaning to actually give them employees with skills or to convey something beyond employment, which has always been kind of our goal in schools, right? Go to school, get good grades, graduate, get a degree, climb the ladder of success, and retire with benefits. That model is not necessarily something any of us can depend upon anymore. So what's going to replace it? And what are we looking at as a social stable model to get us there?
Now, this is something I have to admit I'm passionate about, because I do training for certifications for IT for a living, my day job. But it feels like what you're doing in schools is almost making IT, and specifically programming, more of a vocational type endeavor as opposed to the traditional, school, college degree sort of thing. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because truly IT and programming is part of everything we do. Gym classes, to use your earlier example. So I think that it is a huge shift, and I don't know how colleges are going to adapt to that. So Doc, you're right. And the pandemic has, I think, magnified an issue that is happening anyway. But it's interesting. I really see that IT and programming have just pushed into this vocational world that you don't have to necessarily go to higher education to make that happen.
That's true. And I would say the conflict, the most succinct way of explaining the conflict as it's been explained to me, is that a lot of these universities exist to, quote, build better citizens. And they don't exist necessarily to build a workforce, right? And so the conflict that's present at the top of the university, in the president's office with the provost and the entire structure of deans that are coming in here, there's this dual strategy of, on the one hand, money's coming in because of engineering schools and kids recognizing that they want to make a lot of money in their lives and they want skills that add up. And then there's the social mission of the university and that building better citizens idea. I think we're colliding, right? If you can't understand why social justice issues are present in the year 2020, and you can't break that down into technical terms, if you're just kind of thinking that maybe we need to relitigate history, like that's not really going to work. That's not how we got here. Reality has already happened. And so here we are. and there is a methodology of participation that is not equally accessible to all families and to all members of our society. And we can start seeing how the structure of your participation, it really takes on its own life and becomes the results that are available to you based on that.
What questions have we missed that you would like to have been asked, if any?
That's a good question, Doc. I'm not quite sure.
That's what people say when they don't have an answer generally.
Yeah. I think without going towards any self-promotion aspect, I think that this has been a great interview. I think that you've asked a lot of good questions.
Okay, good. So the second one is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? This is almost like the control question that we ask everybody.
That's funny. I had a sense that I might get asked that question. So blockchain is a cool piece of technology that has a specific use, and there are many cases in which it's not necessary for the use that it's being projected at. I think we're still in the testing phase with blockchain to derive what's the best case scenario where it can be put to use. I mean, we internally have been playing with it, and there's been big pushes in verifiable credentials and all of those types of efforts to try to decentralize some of the infrastructure. And I'm a supporter of testing this stuff out. I don't necessarily believe I've one compelling scenario that makes it the way to change how I do what I do, but I think it fits in the basket as a method that can be used specifically where necessary.
I'm going to jump backwards and ask a question that's not on the list, but if you were asked to serve on, say, the state board of education, some really high level thing that's very institutional, would you accept that, or are you content to work in from the outside the way you're doing it, almost under the radar?
Yeah, I would definitely accept it, and I don't get asked very much to do that. We call ourselves an indie ed tech play because we're trying not to build unfruitful dependencies. There's an effort here in our state, New York. During the pandemic, Governor Cuomo announced through a partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates that they were going to reimagine education. And my first response was, that's kind of irritating. I've got the savior of all things coming down to tell us how we're going to reimagine things. And here I am on the ground putting in a lot of energy and effort as a public benefit technology producer. No one's reaching out to ask me anything. So, I think we're still in this hero worship culture that tends to look up at the size of your bank account and say, hey, they must know how to do everything. When in reality, there's a lot of good leaders on the ground that just the ability to network and the ability to get input is not always accessible to everybody.
Okay, so another one, which is this is the final question. What are your favorite text editor and scripting languages?
Definitely, I'd have to say Python in that regard. And I'd say that that's a good question. My favorite, I jump around. I mean, Adam's good. I'll promote OYO class. I'll do a little self-promotion here. We have some great editors in our platform, and they're improving all the time. So I've been getting the kids passionate about that before we take them into some of our local software and start introducing them to that. There's another software that I'll promote called Sculpt that does a good job in their open source, and so we've collaborated with them as well on producing some Python tools.
Well, that's fantastic. This hour has gone too fast, and we have not gone far enough. So we'll definitely have to have you back, because you're one of the guests I think that for sure by the time we meet again this way, you will have done a lot more. So I very much invite everybody who's listening and watching to pay attention to KidOYO and where you're going with this, Devon. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Doc. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you, and I certainly appreciate listening to the leadership you bring to this entire industry. I think you are a very important voice that everybody needs to hear more from.
Well, thanks a lot. So, Shawn, this is a first for you. I thought you were great, and I think it really helped to have somebody on who's involved in education, because I'm not. I'm just busy being a student.
I appreciate that. No, I know I didn't get asked the question because I'm not a guest, but I just got to put a plug in for VI and Bash scripting. I mean, that's
this is also where we do plugs. So if you
good,
plug, that's it. Yeah.
No, that's it. VI, that's what I chose to plug. Boy, This is great. I hope to do this again, and I'm passionate about education. Hopefully, it came through as passion and not obsession, but it was great. That was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I'm excited because he's addressing at a younger level the things that when I was working at a school district, I was trying to address as well. And it's great to see that he has some traction going. That's awesome.
Are you tempted, either you or your wife, to, I mean, if she were to watch this or listen to it, to get Devon and his wife on the phone and see if there's something they could do in your district?
So to clarify, my wife she's a drama teacher. She's a yearbook teacher. She's an artsy fartsy teacher. I don't know that she would be the person, but I could see the school. And again, I know this is like the timing is everything. Depending on what school looks like, I could see schools needing to have ways to keep students engaged. So while it probably wouldn't be my wife doing it, it could be the school. So I'm going to be referencing all the stuff, and I'm going to make my wife watch this show because, I mean, that's what you do, right? Like, you got to see what I was in. And so she'll see that, hopefully pass it along to the rest of the people in charge at the school. So. Yeah.
I'm wondering too, and I don't know if Shawn's still, Shawn, you're Shawn, Devon's still around. If you have the scale there, Devon, to deal with endless demands. I mean, when you become a hit, you know, do you have the institution? I see what you're doing as like a superset of your family, really, and but obviously there's more there.
Yeah, we're growing pretty quickly. So this year we're going to be around 100,000 students that are coming out of schools, specifically right here in New York, and we'll see. We just launched a KidOYO passport for kind of general access globally just about 2 weeks ago. And so that's grown pretty quickly. I think from the standpoint of our ability to scale, we have a very, very scalable model. It's just really now about whether or not we can get some schools to understand the cost value of live mentors versus only using free tools. Right. So we just got to get kind of some of the step beyond free and get some of that Libre paying attention to.
Okay. Well, now I just been told by my own controller here, I have to say goodbye again because I broke the rules. But anyway, I'm still learning the rules. We'll
see you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Devon. And thank you, Shawn. You got your plug in for VI. I'll get mine in for customer.
Thank you. It's funny, the audio cut out. I have no idea what you're asking me. So
I don't think my audio is cut out this time. But anyway, it's can you not hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, it was just one of those things that timing just cut out. So I'll assume you were saying very kind things about me. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, I was. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on here, and it's been just great that that you're in the business, you know, and you've been around the business, and I'm in the business in a way just because I have affiliations with a bunch of universities, and none of them pay, and none of them are of any, you know, importance to the institutions. They're just, you know, you write a lot and then you get asked a lot to participate. But I think all of education is just going to change completely. There's probably not a single institution that's going to change more than this one in the next few years. And yeah, I'm really excited about it.
And open source, we will it's perfect for that. Right. Sorry to just harp on open source, but we're allowed to because this is the FLOSS Weekly. It's right there. And not just software, but hardware too. I mean, he mentioned Arduinos, et cetera. Oh, it's exciting. It's an exciting time to need open source solutions to global problems. That should be in a T-shirt.
Yeah, I should say, my daughter is also a theater person. She teaches at UMBC. She's the head of the theater department there. She's a faculty chair. And boy, very hard to do in the virtual world. It's an interesting thing. Anyway, so my mentor, to put it in Devon's terms, and I need to do a whole bunch of post-production things here. So thanks a lot for being on here, Shawn. And let's
anytime. I'd love to be back. So
okay, you're on the roster now. You're one of us. so great to see you, and hope to see you again shortly.
I'm Jason Howell, host of Hands on Android, where each week I take a look at the Android operating system and really dive deep into what it can do for you and how it can improve your quality of life, whether it be tips and tricks on how to use it better, whether it can be little-known secrets that open up a world of possibilities. So many topics to dive into, including your emails. Subscribe by going to twit.tv/HOA. We'll see you there.